Okay, so we will have missed Jan's welcome on the recording. Hi, I'm Richard Bentley. I'm going to be leading us through a slide set. Jason is finding it. And I will tell you that as we go through the slide set, you can put questions in the chat. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. And so as you get questions, put them in the chat. Okay, there we are. A number of the United Methodist Africa Forum had their organizing meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa on April 21st and 22nd. And the thing that kept getting said over and over and over again was, we were United Methodists, we are United Methodists, we will be United Methodists. That was sort of the whole theme for the day. And then we moved to the worldwide map of the United Methodist Church. I just want you to see in sub-Saharan Africa, there are 3 different central conferences. Collectively, there are between 5 and 6, this is 2016 data, so at that time there were between 5 and 6 million United Methodists. And then there are 4 other central conferences, 3 in Europe and 1 in the Philippines. And then in the United States, there are the 5 jurisdictions where collectively in 2016 there were around 7 million United Methodists. But the big picture is I wanted to get a sense of we live in a worldwide church, and we live in a worldwide church where it is no longer just the US, it's all of us together. And to me, this map helps to make that real. Let's move on to the next slide. So, who was there or who wanted to come? United Methodist Africa Forum invited people from all 3 of the African central conferences. There were 43 participants who were there. They from all 3 of the different sub-Saharan African central conferences. One of the bishops was there, Bishop Monde, and there were 2 general staff who are actually from Africa who were there, one from UMCOM and one from GCFA. So that's about 46 people from Africa. But in addition, one of the things that was discovered is that South Africa has visa requirements for folks who live in Africa. And so there were 13 people who wanted to come, who, even though many of them tried for over a month, could never get visas. And then there were 3 other people who at the last minute got sick. So if everybody had come that wanted to, there would have been about 60 people. Moving on, and the folks that were there were leaders, and we're moving the other way. And then in addition, UMAF invited folks from the US and around the world to come. There were 6 Christmas Covenant team members from outside of Africa there, along with the 6 Christmas Covenant team leaders from Africa. The Filipinos had visa problems, weren't there. There were 6 general staff from 5 different agencies. 3 of the racial ethnic caucuses sent leaders there, including Lizette Perez, who is on this call with us, and the other 2. Well, all of the racial ethnic caucuses had a leader present that they had chosen at this gathering. And then there were 5 leaders from other US groups like MFSA, WMJM, and UMKR. So that's who was there. But the participants were the folks from Africa, the folks from outside the US were there as observers. And we move on to the first purpose of the meeting was to organize UMAF. And the first was to organize UMAF. And the thing that amazed me, every time they planned to have an organizing activity, the time got blown up because people were so engaged and so enthusiastic and thought that what they were doing was so important. So their name says forum, they really were a forum with a variety of viewpoints and things that they did. They organizing document. They thought they would come in 30 minutes. It took them over an hour and 2 days. Their closing meeting to affirm their next steps started at 8 p.m. when they were supposed to adjourn, went to midnight. And then we move on to the officers, which are on the next page. And they were, the election of officers, again, took 2 days, not over, took a lot more time. There was lots of discussion. Lloyd Naroda, who's on the call, is the general coordinator. Some of you may know Betty Kazadi, who was elected as one of the officers. The rest of them were there, but one of the things they did was to make sure that there is at least one officer from each of the 3 sub-Saharan annual conferences, actually 2. And if you know Africa, you know that the European languages that are used, there are 3 of them. And so there are secretaries, they have somebody who speaks and can translate into all 3 of the European languages. So moving along. The thing that struck me was that the framing question for what UMAF seems to be about and for what organized the whole meeting was maintaining the unity and connections of the USC, United Methodist Church, for mission and social justice. And that's what the focus is, and that's, and I emphasize that because many times in the past, my impression has been that in Africa, that what people have, some groups have tried to make the framing question is maintaining the traditional stance on human sexuality. When you talk about the unity of the church, everything changes. After all, we are, and we will be United Methodists. So with that framing question, let's look and see what else happened. There was discussion about supporting bishops in Africa, and you need to understand that discussion was rather interesting because people made it clear that supporting the bishops also meant engaging with them and challenging them and all kinds of things, but also wanting to be connected with them and work with them. A huge discussion was regionalization and strong regionalization, and specifically the Christmas Covenant. Bishop Monde, when he gave his keynote address, specifically voiced support for it. Lloyd Naroda gave this long, hour-long presentation on the pros and cons of regionalization, one of the best I've ever heard. Karen Prudente presented strategy for its adoption and ratification. And there are 3 Christmas Covenant leaders on the UMAF leadership team. So I want you to understand that the Christmas Covenant is a key part of what UMAF sees for wanting to accomplish going forward. Next slide. There was also a lot of discussion about the revised, less US-centric social principles. To me, that talked about how important organizing and staying connected, not as just for mission, but for accomplishing social justice. There was talk about sustaining and about self-sustainability and self-sufficiency for Africa, staying connected with the general agencies, ethnic caucuses, other US groups. And there is a plan to have all of the African GC delegates gather in Africa in early 2024. That would be about 1/3 of the General Conference. And I left for last because this is what people will usually focus on first, so I wanted us to hear it. They did talk about maintaining the church's present stance on homosexuality, but the specific language is upholding paragraph 304.3, which is the ordination standards for clergy. And that was the extent of it. So I'm done with the overview. So it's up to Jan to, there's the African Bishop's letter, which is just there. Anyway, so I think we're back to Jan and some more personal reflections about what happened.
Mute. So this is a time when several of us who were there and planned this presentation are going to offer a couple minutes each of personal reflection. And I think I will let Jason get us started. And he's going to pick the next person.
Okay, hold on one second. I try and talk and do the tech stuff at the same time, but that just gets me confused. So I'll try not to do that. I found that it was very interesting. It was the first time I'd been to anywhere in Africa, and getting to understand and really see. One of the things that they also talked about at the Africa Forum was the challenges that are facing the church in Africa, and how some of the challenges are similar to ours. They have more conservative and charismatic churches taking members, but they also have a really shortage of clergy. Way beyond any shortage of clergy that we have in the United States. So just putting perspective and getting to understand that context of what their challenges are and what they see, but yet they felt it was a very United Methodist feeling forum, which kind of, to me, goes to, there's a lot of things that we don't think that are the same as United Methodists anywhere in the world. And we might not agree on everything, but those few things that we don't agree on, we tend to focus on those, even though when we look, if you take a step back and take at the bigger picture, it's like, no, there's a lot that makes us United Methodists, and you can tell that we were all United Methodists in that room. So it was great being a chance to go there and observe and really understand, but give a better understanding as to their challenges, and them wanting us to, and they inviting us to be there with them. Their discussions on homosexuality were, even though the ending result might not have been of what I would it was definitely not what I would have wanted, but their discussion just had a lot more love and grace in it than most I've ever had in the United States. So that that was, and they're dealing with, we tend to forget, they're dealing with multiple languages and multiple cultures at the same time. So it's definitely it's not monolithic at all. And their concerns are in some ways very different from ours. Some are the same, but it's just the context is different. And when we're talking about it, we need to appreciate that difference in context. Do that. So I will call on Izzy to go next. Oops, except I have to unspotlight myself so that I can spotlight.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Sorry. Trying to do multiple things at once.
Hello, everybody. I'm Izzy Alvaran. I am an organizer for RMN. I also had the privilege of being invited to be there as chair of as convener of the Christmas Covenant team, which met the day after the Africa Forum adjourned its meeting. So we also have a lot of all of the team members in the Christmas Covenant team who are from the continent of Africa are all part of the United Methodist Africa Forum. So I would just start off with the enormous support given to regionalization. Richard already mentioned that, but I wanted to underscore that by the fact that all of the team members from Africa, from the continent of Africa, from the Christmas Covenant team, are part of this gathering. And the fact that the whole Christmas Covenant team, including those from the Philippines and the United States and Europe, were invited to be there to listen and then also to convene. It was the first time we actually had our first in-person meeting. So now, we've been talking about regionalization. We've been talking about the Christmas Covenant for how many years now? Since the end of 2019 or the early 2020. But our team we've never really met in person. All of this was all through Zoom and emails. And that was the first time we actually met. And it's so appropriate that we met in a central conference in person, right? And the second thing I want to stress, I'm from a central conference. In fact, I just got back. If I look jet lagged, I am. I just got back from the Philippines early this morning. And after a 30-hour flight, stopping in Guam and Hawaii. And I feel, I sense, I saw, I heard, I smelled, I tasted Central Conference at that gathering. Almost the same concerns. There's just tad differences in terms of context, sustainability, traditional values, relationships are important. So I saw that in the way things were run, because the whole program, who were speaking, who's at the table, who's saying what, and then who's invited. These were all done by our Central Conference folks in Africa. And I from a Central Conference in the Philippines, whenever I'm dealing with anything sometimes related outside the church, I'm so used to, and I could be a little bit blunt here, the Americans are creating the agenda, right? And I just have to attend. No, these were local people, United Methodists, who made this happen. And we were all there invited to listen. So we tried our best to really listen hard. There were hard conversations. And I will close with this, and we could probably discuss this more later. And I'm saying this as an out gay United Methodist clergy. And there have been a lot of conversations about, some of our friends in Africa who are at this United Methodist Africa Forum still believe in some parts of the Book of Discipline related to LGBTQ inclusion or human sexuality that we say as a church. Yes, that's also true in my Central Conference. That's also true of my bishops in the Philippines and my friends who are clergy, who, by the way, included me in the passing of our character and official administration in my annual conference. We have genuine differences, but are those differences permanent? Nothing is permanent in the hands of God. I think God is a creator God, and things change. What I'm saying is I felt so much respect for that conversation because I was in the room, right? And that the fact that we were all included in a family gathering, I felt so much respect. Because, when we have family gatherings, that's what we do, right? Honey, can you go to the kitchen and help me with the, pots and pans? Then you have a secret meeting. No, we were in the kitchen while it was being cooked and conversations were happening and we were included. And I have total respect for that process because we're all in a journey. That's my reflection. I'm included in the journey. It's almost like people were walking towards Emmaus and Jesus was okay walking with them and answering their crazy questions, right? And still be in the closet with them about him. He never really came out to the people at the Emmaus until communion happened. Anyway, so that conversation around human sexuality is still part of the struggle. It's also part of my struggle in the Philippines. But when conversations turn into really relationships, then it shifts. And I saw that in the table conversations around good food. So these conversations continue to happen and need to happen. Remember, regionalization and whatever is in the discipline around discriminatory language, I know those are main concerns right? But this gathering in Africa, and I'll just say this bluntly, this gathering in Africa didn't happen so that Americans can change the minds of people in central conferences. Okay? This gathering happened because we were invited to a family reunion of people who love the United Methodist Church. That's what that gathering is all about. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Who are you going to choose, Izzy?
Oh, I will choose. I'll have Richard for last.
Good.
Or maybe Lloyd. Lloyd will be the one for last.
No.
I'll choose Richard.
Oh, well, I was hoping I would be last because I already got to talk.
Oh, Jan then, Jan.
Okay. I think for me, by far, the best part of the whole meeting was the conversations. And not just because in the meetings I couldn't talk, that wasn't so bad, but around meals, you know, what's better than breaking bread together? We had amazing conversations, and it wasn't all about the United Methodist Church. And some of it that was about the church was about concerns that weren't any part of the meeting, but just things that we have in common or that are different between United Methodists in different parts of the world. And some of the conversations were about grandkids and families and home and and I had a fascinating conversation, or mostly listened to one, driving about an hour to Sunday worship with folks. I think I was the only American in the car, talking about their kids and grandkids and their questions about how much they should be using social media. So there are so many things that we all have in common, and some of them are a little surprising. But to me, just the beginnings of relationship and continuing some relationships with people I already knew was really the best part, because each one of us is different, brings our own unique perspective. And if we don't start having individual relationships, we're only going to get part of the picture. And as Jason said, Africa certainly is not monolithic. And in fact, every single person at that meeting and every single person from Africa is different. A couple of people have alluded already to to some difficult conversations. I decided that if I was there, I might as well bring all of myself. And so I did, in the course of conversation, come out to a couple of people I had not known before I got there. And they didn't seem to be particularly bothered by that. One was kind of surprised to hear that I'd been in a relationship for 28 years and was married to a woman, but not upset with me at all. I know I'm not clergy, but still it was an atmosphere of, it was okay to be who I am. And I really appreciated that, and it gave me hope. And one of those people said to me after the conversation and the vote about upholding the discipline, she said, change is coming in Africa, and it's going to be sooner than most people think. But that was a very encouraging thought. But as I look at the whole picture, change is not completely come to the United States either. We're all in the process. We may be further along in some parts of the process. I think there are also a lot of things we can learn from Africa about mission and ministry and dedication to the word. I just think there were a lot of amazing people there, and I'm so grateful that I was able to be part of it. So if Richard wants to go last, I guess it must be Lloyd's turn.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it was probably my talk will be slightly different probably from the others because being from Africa, and I went there having started with others to just put it together and hoping that we'll put in place new leaders to take up the movement and go with it. I ended up being the general coordinator. It was quite humbling the way that went. But I thank God for that. I think the first thing I would like to put up front to this group is to thank you, all of you, for the support, the financial support, the encouragement, the organizing that went into it for the forum to actually happen. So that's something very important that I would like to put up there and to give this special thanks to all the fundraising that happened with the Western Methodist Justice Movement to support the Christmas Covenant group to be there. It actually helped the forum to happen. Some interesting things that I would like to bring is at the United Methodist Africa Forum, this was one point, probably the only time in Africa it has happened. I'm not sure if it has happened anywhere else. I wouldn't want to be conclusive, where we had a bishop, we had general agencies, officially represented. We had caucuses, different caucuses, like BMCR and UMKR, MACHA, and NAFAM, and all these other caucuses. And also have organizations like Western Methodist Justice Movement, MFSA, and so on, all in the same room at the same time, having conversations about the United Methodist Church. General agencies were represented at very high level. Most of the general agencies send their senior staff to be there, and some general secretaries came with also supporting staff there. And we had a bishop. We could have had more than, we had 3 bishops who could not make it. One because of visa, the other one got sick, and the other one got commitments. So as we were planning this, we were likely to be in that room with the president of the Council of Bishops. Bishop Bickerton had committed to come, but then things kept on developing that pulled him in many directions. So that was something that happened, and I said, probably this is the mini general conference here happening in Johannesburg. And we had delegates, general conference delegates, African Central Conferences delegates in the room. So that is something that it was interesting. Also, we had representation like the United States, Europe, Philippines, and Africa. So you can see how this gathering was. It was really a good moment of being United Methodists together. Also, from the resolutions that the United Methodist Africa Forum made, I think the United Methodist Africa Forum probably could be the place so far where we have endorsement of regionalization, endorsement of the social principles, and upholding the current language in the Book of Discipline, all on the same page. And I think that shows us how dynamic the United Methodist is when we talk about being a global church, being in all parts of the world. So that, and something I would like to put up front, the conversation was very in-depth, especially on the final resolution on upholding the discipline. Was a very engaging conversation. Everyone was speaking passionately, and probably for some of you who were not there, interestingly, there was no agreement for a long time. And you may need to know that this conversation came up at the forum twice. And first time, it was not conclusive. Second time, it went on for almost probably 2 hours or more. And everyone was, it was at that moment when we just had to use the way we converse in Africa, where we keep on talking and talking. And the time was no longer of essence. That conversation had just tended to be African in nature, where time was not of essence, but everyone's opinion was important. It was important that everyone is heard. There were no Robertson rules. There was no voting up and down. There were no amendments. People were just talking. And that's how we resolve issues in Africa. If an issue is contagious, we talk until sunset, from sunrise to sunset. By the time we get from under the tree going to our homes, we know as a village we are one accord. At least everyone has been heard. No one say, I had an important point if they had heard it. So that's what exactly what happened. And eventually there was kind of consensus. And there's something that I want to emphasize on that resolution. You see that the resolution went for ordination standards rather than for the social principles or other places. And what that is indicating, we are saying we understand where others are and we understand where we are at this point in time in Africa. We are not yet ready to receive clergy who are gay. That is, we are not there. And there has been thinking that probably people in Africa don't understand homosexuality. I always say, almost in every language in Africa, we have the word for homosexuality, the indigenous word, which means there are people of that orientation who are there, but the African society deals with sexuality in a very different manner. And given that, and given the culture, given the interpretation of the scripture that we are on as a continent and as United Methodist in the continent, the resolution is basically saying we will not, at this point, we are not ready to have clergy, because if any clergy who is gay is sent to a church, that is not going to help that congregation or that community. It's not going to help. Ministry is not going to happen where the people in our congregations and communities are. So I think I just wanted to put that up front there and probably turn it over to Richard.
Well, then I'm going to try to be brief. The formation, as some of you may know, I've been working at building relationships outside the United States for 10 years. This is the first time I felt like there's been a group that progressive United Methodists could engage in conversation with. We've had individuals we've talked with, but there's never been an organized group. The only organized group that's, doing a lot of things up until now has been Africa Initiative, which is an extension of the WCA and the GC and GMC. But I also need to be clear, this is a group that was organized by people in Africa, for people in Africa, about what needs to happen in Africa. So please don't expect everything that happens in UMAF to be things that everyone in the US will like, agree with, or whatever. It is an independent, indigenous group that wants to stay engaged and connected with a worldwide church, which is shown by all the folks that got invited. and all the table fellowship and all that happened. I'm going to be bad and say something that Lloyd said to me, and I gather he said to others. One of the things that I think the Africans were pleasantly surprised by was they're used to having Americans talk about, we believe listening is important, and then they don't listen. And I was told that this was one of the first times that many folks felt like a major group of folks from the US came and listened. And I see Lloyd, at least on my screen, Lloyd is nodding. And I think going forward, it's going to be involved listening and being listened to. And since the US has often been in a dominant position, it's the hardest thing of all is going to be folks who are used to being in the dominant position need to start by listening. And I was actually told by someone in my delegate from my annual conference who's not on this call, she said, you know, Richard, the most remarkable thing of all there at UMAF for me was you didn't talk at the mic for 2 days. Jason is smiling. So I do want to emphasize, I think going forward that listening is going to be important, but also that there's a group that progressives can work with and talk with. Notice who UMAF chose to have be there as partners and to engage with. It was progressive groups, and it was racial ethnic caucuses. So to me, this is a sign of hope. We're not always going to be happy with each other. We're always not going to agree with each other. But I hope we can stay connected and engaged and move forward together in ways that will surprise us all. So I think that's a good place to stop.
Okay. So there's been not too many questions in the chat, but there are some questions that were sent in with the registration, since that was a required field in the registration form. That made it kind of interesting. And Jason is going to moderate that. He has kind of grouped some of the questions together. And if other things come to mind, I encourage you, it's not too late to put questions in the chat. We'll keep doing that until we run out of time or you run out of questions. So Jason, go for it.
Okay, so I broadly grouped the questions together to help us move along here. And so we got the first couple of set of questions were specific questions about the forum itself. What were what are the how were attendees who were LGBTQ received? What are the challenges and hopes that we experienced about this meeting? And then what were your team's goals, strategies, and successes in accomplishing these goals? And what are our additional follow-up efforts? So I think Jan kind of covered how the attendees who were LGBTQ received. The only other thing I would say on that, I mean, I also let people know that I'm gay, and that didn't that wasn't stopping them wanting to be in ministry and wanting to invite us to be in ministry with them. So it was a somewhat of a different conversation than I've had before. And are there anything else that anyone wants to add about how we were received or challenges and hopes that we experienced about this meeting? I think our personal reflections pretty much covered all of those questions.
Well, I could say the one who was elected, I think, was it the one from Liberia, Lloyd, Pastor Dorma, right? So I came, some of them attended our Christmas Covenant team meeting, and he was one of them. And I came out at that Christmas Covenant team meeting as a gay clergy person. He approached me soon after the meeting and said, I'm really very thankful for what you shared about yourself.
And I wanted you to know that I love you with the love of God, and gave me a big hug and said, please come to Liberia. I said, I was just surprised. No, see, that's just one example.
Yeah, no, that definitely, like I was saying, yeah, we were very much, they're definitely even, they were talking to us. They wanted us to come and be with them. So, the next set of questions that we got were around organizing in Africa, and Lloyd may need to answer some of these questions. There were questions about having regional representation from all parts of Africa. I don't remember who, but also North Africa, but I think North Africa is technically with Europe, so I'm not quite sure about that. Does the Africa Forum group seem to be growing? And then what plans do we have for the Kenyan brothers? And I wasn't not sure what the context of that is, but maybe Lloyd can go on that group of questions.
Yeah. In terms of representation, all the 3 central conferences in Africa were represented, with most conferences being represented. A delegation from Nigeria could not come because of visas. So the whole Nigerian delegation didn't make it because of visas. I mean, like the South African embassies were just slow in terms of processing visas. Some got their visas. I mean, when the forum was on second day, some got their visas, called for visas on Sunday, Monday, after the forum was over. Yeah, so in terms of growth, I think the United Methodist, the forum is growing. There is a lot of interest in the forum, and a lot of interest to be part of the forum, and a lot of people who now want to be part of the forum. Organizing going forward, right now, we have already engaged the bishops. We are waiting. I just got a response from their leadership today, from the email, because we did a report which we have sent to all the bishops of what happened in Johannesburg and what is the way forward, where we would want to go. So we are now conversing about strategizing on how we will be going to General Conference next year. So there is plan to meet with the General Conference delegates. The leadership, the UMAF leadership, have met once after after Johannesburg for an executive meeting, and the conversations are also. Oh, I'm glad on this call we have our General Secretary is here. Let me then introduce him, Reverend Gabriel Bangab-Suswa, who is on this call. He is our General Secretary for the United Methodist Africa Forum. So it's important that he is here with us. We have started conversations about gathering General Conference delegates, but we are very clear, very, very clear, that our gathering of General Conference delegates, we are looking at delegates who are subscribing to the slogan, we were, we are, and we will be United Methodist always. Because we know we have General Conference delegates who are pushing for their conferences, or some of them to leave and go to the Global Methodist. There are some who are talking about being autonomous. I mean, there are lots of things flying across the continent, what people are trying to say. But the forum is basically saying we are United Methodist, we will be United Methodist. So there's organizing that is going on that end. Probably whilst I'm still on this, I would like to, I had it down, and I think it would be important for you to hear it from us who were with the leadership of the Africa Forum. Richard mentioned it. I have been around Americans for a while. I've been in a room with Americans for a while. I have asked to speak at gatherings of Americans for a while. I've been in places where we had Americans and other nationalities and central conferences and all that. I've been hanging a while. One thing I can tell you is I've never seen Americans at their best in terms of listening, like what happened in Johannesburg. You did, I mean, the conversations were difficult, and I was surprised of my friends, my American friends, whom I have hanged around for a while, that they managed to keep quiet and keep cool as conversations were going on. I mean, that was, after that, I said, right, I think stereotyping, I learned what stereotyping is. To always say, oh, you know, Americans can't listen. The Americans can listen very well if they decide to. And I think that was, and in Johannesburg, that was well done. That was well demonstrated. And I would like to make this point, having said that helps people who came to Johannesburg thinking that the United Methodist Africa Forum was being organized to push certain goals from the US UMC. When they saw that the best the US delegation was doing was praying whilst we were doing our business, that changed the narrative of the understanding of where the forum is going and what the forum is trying to achieve. I just wanted to make sure I had written it, but it had slipped off, and I just think it will be important. It's important that you hear it, not from Richard praising himself, but from us saying this is real. It was really good. Thank you.
And that kind of so that kind of segues into the next question, Lloyd, is and probably you and Jan and Richard, but what can U.S. United Methodists do to help the organizing of the United Methodist Africa Forum? Or how can U.S.-based United Methodists support that organizing?
Yeah, I know Reverend Suswa, you can chime in. I know his network, that is why you see him disappearing every now and then. He's in Zambia, and his network may be playing up. I think maybe to start with, this continuous conversation. The group is a forum. The name forum was deliberately chosen. The name forum was deliberately chosen. That this is a forum where we gather and exchange ideas and engage and share ideas. So I think one way of supporting the forum is continuous engagement, and where we can keep the conversation, building the relationships. One. Secondly, I would like to be very honest, we will continue needing financial support, fundraising, and when we do that, we would expect, so that we would continue gathering and bringing people together so that these conversations can go on. So continuous engagement, continuous building relationships, continuous resource provision of resources for the work of the forum to go on as we are conversing. I will leave others to chime in.
The thing that I would say, I appreciate Lloyd's answer, and I wouldn't begin to know how I could help until they ask, but we have our own work to do in the United States, building support for the Christmas Covenant. And the Christmas Covenant team has been working really hard in Africa and really hard in the Philippines. And we need a really good effort in the US to help pass the, not only at General Conference, but the ratification votes for the constitutional amendments. And that's not directly helping the Africa Forum, but since they're very clear that what the church in Africa needs is regionalization, and I think that's our biggest task.
I heard at the meeting, and it's part of the resolution, is to gather, and this more pertains to what is immediately before us, which is 3 general conferences, right? The one is happening next year. But part of the commitment I heard from UMAF is to gather general conference delegates from all 3 central conferences in Africa. So that's over 300 to 400 general conference delegates. And I don't know when that's happening, Lloyd, but you can say that, you know, we would definitely want to be of support in any way, because I discovered that travel within the continent of Africa is very expensive. So please comment on that, Lloyd. I think that's one way we can support.
Yes, sure. The plan is there. The conversations that have happened is we are still discussing, can we bring all the general conference delegates together? And also we are very careful. Honestly, when we gather general conference delegates, we are not going to bring Jerry Cooler there. Definitely. As the forum, we are very clear that that is not going to happen. We will not bring Africa Initiative people there. I mean, especially Africa Initiative people who are pushing for WCA agenda and GMC agenda. We have lots of people who have been part of the Africa Initiative when they were the only organizing group in Africa. So we are not saying if you have been part of the Africa Initiative, you can't be. We have a lot of people who have been part of the Africa Initiative who are part of the forum also. But when we bring general conference delegates together, we are looking at delegates who are committed to stay United Methodist. So there's discussion whether we will do it in 3 separate central conferences or we will bring them together. So that's a conversation we have started with the bishops. We have started that conversation with the bishops. We have started that conversation with some general agencies to see how they can support that too. So we are brainstorming. The leadership of the forum is also looking into that. I see there are some questions on the chat that may need to be addressed, but probably when we are done with this one, I think there's something about BMCR and then the Christmas Covenant.
Yeah, so the next set of questions are going to be about, there's 3 more sets of questions. The first set is about what to do about the Christmas Covenant and General Conference. And then after that, since Lloyd has been talking so much, the question of what groups is UMAF is working with and BMCR and all those questions. So we're going to move hopefully to the next set of questions, which was about what's coming up at General Conference. Is UMAF supportive of regionalization and removal of harmful language against LGBTQ people in the Book of Discipline? What are kind of the most important, biggest issues we believe will be facing General Conference? What action can be taken that's most helpful now? But conferences are endorsing the Christmas Covenant. I don't know if we can answer that question here, but then please comment on the movement toward a regional United Methodist Connection church body. And then I think Jeremy had a question regarding arguments against the Christmas Covenant as being colonial, which I don't actually understand because it decolonizing the church's structure, but hopefully we can kind of answer all those kind of questions about General Conference and Christmas Covenant. Yeah.
I don't understand that comment around regionalization being colonial. I think in some annual conferences, it was even called racist.
Can I speak to my question, Izzy?
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, friends. Jeremy Smith, Seattle, Washington. He, him. I am connected to annual conferences that had floor speeches when they were talking about the resolution supporting the Christmas covenant, and it's for whatever reason the people against the Christmas covenant have been calling it colonial, which doesn't make sense to me. And so I wanted to see if there were maybe, I'm not going to say like a new narrative, but was there something that coalesced for the people who were at the forum that made it feel definitely not colonial in the least, and that would be helpful for Americans when they're arguing with each other? And it's all right if that's if the answer is no, that it just stands on its own.
Yeah, I'll have other people answer, but I mean, from my vantage point, I mean, the people who got colonized are the ones who are asking for the change and are very emphatic that they see it as a way to decolonize our structure. And it's coming from them. The whole Christmas covenant is coming from our central conferences. So maybe Izzy and Lloyd could take that further, but yeah.
I think that's a great answer on its own. Yes.
And the fact that, yeah, go ahead, Lloyd.
It is a talking point that WCA have started channeling out. I mean, I've heard it from the WCA council members in Africa, and what they have said is their point they're trying to make is it's colonial in that the majority of delegates will be from Africa, and then now you want to regionalize so that we wouldn't make decisions for the church in Africa in the United States. That's what they fumble around. They haven't made a substantive argument on how colonial it is against how decolonizing the Christmas covenant is. So it's just a desperate way of hanging on to the reeds when the flood is sweeping them away. I think that's how we are interpreting it in Africa. That I mean, the WCA, the Africa Initiative, GMC, is being wiped out their relevant presence or anything across the African continent in the United Methodist. Besides those who have left, actually most of those who have left are people who left under disciplinary charges. And when they left, then they formed the GMC because they had nothing else to do. They had been charged from the United Methodist, withdrawn from ministry. So that's what is happening. It's nothing really serious. It's not something that we have heard across the continent. Besides, so far, I've only heard it from one person in Africa.
That's helpful, Lloyd. Thank you. I just always think to the end of the process, which is when we have the constitutional amendments being voted on, the aggregate numbers, every vote counts. And so making sure that we're prepared for those arguments on the floor is super helpful. And I appreciate your perspective.
Definitely. I think the only other part of that do we want to mention anything about the regional United Methodist and how that could strengthen the church? I think there's some people who are concerned that regionalization further decentralizes, and that's going to cause an even weaker church, I guess, is one of the concerns.
I'll respond to that. I think it our unity, and I've seen this in annual conferences in the Philippines, and it's still happening right now, because the frame for conversations in the Philippines is unity, because they sense that there's an attempt to break up the church, and people are leaving, or we have churches that are unilaterally taking property in the Philippines. But in these resolutions, I mean the conversations, the unity that we share together is the mission entrusted to us by the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is where we are united. That's what makes us a church. It's not really our structure. Our structure is a means to actually live into fulfilling the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's why the Christmas Covenant has proposed that maybe there is a new way as a global church where there is a way for us to do ministry more effectively, which is based on our context. We're still going to be united as a church in the mission that we do. That is actually what unites us. We might have a lot of differences, and I saw that in what Dave put in the chat. We have a lot of differences in opinions. I mean, United Methodists have a lot of differences in opinions. Even folks within the Africa Forum had a lot of differences in opinions when I was listening in. But we were all united in fulfilling the gospel of Jesus Christ as United Methodists together. So I think that should strengthen our work, because now we're able to do that work more effectively in the context, in the mission context that we are in.
Yeah, and then okay, so then the next group is coming back to one of the questions I think we had in the chat too, was like there were questions around who the United Methodist Forum is working with, and how can we work better together. There were concerns over there's a concern over which I think kind of follows from what Izzy was saying, is a large tent concept still a possibility despite our contextual differences? So yeah, can we, because I think those two a little bit go hand in hand, is what does that large tent look like, and who else is UMAF planning to work with? I think it kind of follows from all the people who were invited, but is there anything else we want to add on that question, Lloyd?
Yeah, United Methodist Africa Forum is ready to work. I think the thing that came out very clear in Johannesburg is, as United Methodist Africa Forum, we are ready to work with anyone, everyone, as long as their focus is staying in the United Methodist. Then we can deal with the rest. If you are staying United Methodist, then let's talk. Let's see where we agree. Let's see where we disagree. And then we come to a place we say, you see, and that is the basis. That is the basis of strong support for regionalization. Because our understanding as a forum is, we'll come to a point we say, as Filipinos, this is where you are. As Africans, this is where we are. And here are points of differences. And these are influenced either by geopolitical influence or religious influence, cultural influence. There are lots of things that influences how we develop our faith, how we interpret scripture. It's influenced by a lot of things. So being in different parts of the world, we have different influences and we can have disagreements. But the bottom line, United Methodist Africa Forum as a drone is, are you staying United Methodist? Yes, now let's talk. Let's engage. Let's see how we can move forward in our differences. And we know that there are a lot of things that we will not understand from other cultures, and there are a lot of things that other cultures will not understand from us. But there is one common theme. We are United Methodists. And then what does that mean to be United Methodist? So I think that's how I see how, and that is why there was a lot of focus, which somebody asked, there was a lot of focus in reaching out to ethnic caucuses like BMCR, Macha, Native American International Caucus, the Federation of Asian American, and I mean, all those other ethnic caucuses. We are trying to say, probably there are some things we can learn from these caucuses that have been in this for a long time. What is it that we can learn? And what is it that we can cross-pollinate from each other? I think that's what I would say is the long and short.
Yes, Richard?
We don't often talk about what it is that connects us as United Methodists. And I think one of the places we're tripping ourselves up is to think that we have to agree on the discipline and we have to agree on certain issues. But I've heard people talk about, you knew we were with Methodists. And for me, there's this odd section of the discipline that's not even numbered. Well, it probably is numbered. Everything is. That talks about the three forms of grace that come out of the Methodist tradition: prevenient grace, that God is at work in every human heart; saving grace, that we need to, something happens that connects us with God and takes away sin; and sanctifying grace, that we grow, which is that we grow on towards perfection or becoming perfect in love. And those are some core values that really, as I've listened with Methodists around the world, they're there. And we might do well to talk about some of the core values. We also have a core value about mission and engaging in connecting with people and sharing God's love in practical ways. If your heart is my heart, let's work together. We tend to have a strong service or love in action mentality, not I mean love as we are doing something. And so we may want to talk about how regionalization helps us to contextualize that rather than getting tripped up with each other over ordination standards, processes for organizing a local church, which is what the Methodist, which is a lot of what the discipline is doing. And at least as I think part of the regionalization strength is that it would let us then begin to work in different regions in ways that let this core Methodist belief or core Methodist values be worked out most effectively in the regions in which we live. That's at least my thought.
I'll add. So I went to the Philippines twice within the last 6 months. And one thing that I did intentionally was ask young, gay, United Methodists, why are you still in this church, especially in the Philippines? I mean, I have privilege being in the US and out gay, but I said, you're young people, you know that the church in the Philippines, United Methodist Church, is very traditional. Why are you United Methodist? And they always point to our social principles. They point to our theology of grace. And I'm just amazed how they actually read. I mean, I've had two kids who already said, could you please buy me a book of discipline or buy me a book of resolutions? I want to read it. Because the concerns we have in the Philippines is human rights. And as United Methodists, they're able to say, I'm part of a global church that believes in this. This is my church. I mean, yes, there are social values that are more traditional, but they also exist in a community where, you know, their main concern is being killed for their political views or just because they're being targeted, or poverty. And for me, growing up, it's about planting churches, because I was of that generation where every local church had a church plant that they support. And I remember volunteers in mission would always come from different parts of the world, building churches. And I also remember whenever we have, this might sound utilitarian to some, but that also happens in the US. There's UMCOR. when there's a storm, we always have storms, like 30 storms a year. We have earthquakes. It's immediate. The response is felt. Now you say, well, that is a result of us being a connectional church. And we're proud, at least in my country, to say, oh, that is my church. Even here in the US, when there's something that happens and I see UMCOR out there in the field, I could say that is my church.
But I think the next part of this is which I know that the people at since I was there, when I was there, I know I had a number of conversations about justice issues with people, with participants at the forum. But how can we work together to mitigate some of the abuses and injustices in churches, especially outside of the United States? And how is UMAF relating to justice issues, or working with justice issues?
Yeah, I think justice issues in Africa are a daily thing. This is something that happens, and you may need to take it. There was a robust conversation at UMAF about justice issues within the church. There was a lot of conversation about how other people are treated, how leadership in the church is. Even up to now, we are still trying to deal with some of those issues within the church. But then when it comes to issues of human rights, democracy, there are lots of issues that the church in Africa is dealing with. So it's that's a huge thing that happens on daily basis on the church in Africa, because politically, in terms of the secular politics, we are still yet to take the bend where human rights are basic human rights. Is a fight that the church is engaging in on daily basis. And there's no disagreement on that. And that is part of the driving force why we so much want to continue as part of the global church, because it gives our leadership the prophetic standing that they will need to challenge, to speak truth to power. Because we know that when our church leaders in Africa, our bishops or some leaders, when they speak truth to power, they may be treated differently when some other churches that are not global or connectional speak. Usually the Catholics are respected, the Anglicans and the Methodists are respected, because what the political leaders know is, if you take a Methodist bishop and lock them in prison for what they have said, then you have the whole worldwide Methodist reacting and responding. And the next day, there are a number of members of the Congress who have received letters about that from United Methodist in the United States. Also, the parliaments in Europe will be told about it, because the bishops in Europe will be saying one of us. So that is one of the driving forces, justice issues, how to be prophetic and how to address basic human rights issues as the church in Africa. That's why being a global church is very important to the African church. That's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, we had young missionaries who were imprisoned in the Philippines a few years before the pandemic. Two of them were from Africa, one from the United States. These were young adult missionaries. I think, what program was that, Neil? Anyway, they were imprisoned by
they were Global Mission Fellows. They were not US2s, Global Mission
They're
Fellows
global
were
mission
incarcerated.
fellows. They're young
Yeah.
adults.
One was from Malawi, one was from Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And then one from the
Standing up
United
to the-
States. And they were imprisoned because they
Wow.
were working in the rural areas and were being accused by the government of being communist supporters. And they were imprisoned. Our whole connection got them out of prison. Because suddenly you have Republican US senators who are United Methodists calling in saying, no, you don't do this. You don't do this. So the pressure was on. And then my bishop, who's now retired, he's part of a fellowship of bishops in the Philippines, fellow bishops, right? And they always tease him and say, amongst us here, this guy here is the real bishop, because we all just added bishop titles to our names, because they recognize the power of our connectional system, that we are together in different regions of the world.
Okay, and so the last part, the wrap up of the questions.
Actually, Jason, before you do that,
Yes, Richard.
there's also the question about the UMAF and the African diaspora, which hasn't been addressed. So can we at least look at that one before we go on?
Sure.
No.
Do we have any answer about what's the vision for UMAF and working with the African diaspora in the United States?
You all understand when the initiative started to create United Methodist Africa Forum, there was a lot of African diaspora involved in that. Naftali, Albert, and others, but also that's why there has been this effort to engage with the BMCR also, and to begin to have conversations with That's why BMCR was represented by two of their leaders at the gathering in Johannesburg. So like the president of BMCR was there. And there are continuous conversations that we are hoping they will continue to happen. I'm quasi-Africa diaspora. I was not expecting to be elected to lead the forum, because when we were moving towards, we were thinking would want people who are present in the continent. But it looks like there was consensus on okay, we would want you to lead. Very well knowing that I had flown from Canada to the forum, and I was going to fly back after the forum, but they respected the connections with my membership still being in Zimbabwe East Conference, and the connections and working together. So there is that understanding and that deliberate effort to connect, especially with caucuses like BMCR and others.
Okay, the last part is what does the future of the UMC look like? Oh, Mark has a hand up. Sorry, can't
Lizette.
quite see everybody. Oh, Lizette had a hand up too. Sorry.
I
Hey,
just
Mark?
want to make, yes, I just want to make several comments. It was very interesting, Lloyd, that the People's Forum of People of African Descent just met at the UN. It was the largest gathering of the descendants of slavery in this hemisphere, from Canada, the US, Central America, the Caribbean, and South Africa. In South America. And there were delegates and persons from Europe and also from Africa. So I just want you to know that took place. And I just want to say on the human rights issue, it was very important when African leaders spoke out about the death of George Floyd. All right. So you need to understand, I hope that you understand that human rights can go both ways. It also can go from the continent to America and from America to the continent. And on the issue of gay rights, I've noticed that the African diaspora that has just arrived its views are changing on gay rights. And I also noticed in the groups that I was working with when I did public policy work for the General Board of Church and Society, many of those who've come from the continent, also I saw their views changing. So I just want you to be aware of that. And I hope you all, the naysayers won't say, oh, you all around all these white people, that's why you all support gay rights. But anyway, I just leave it at that.
Lizette?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this report. I was going exactly the same way that what Mark mentioned, and I wanted to add that because I was able to be there at the meeting, that I noticed that Africans who have been working or have a relationship with the United States somehow they were able to understand the LGBTQ issues, and they were advocating, even within themselves for inclusion. And that I think it's important that first generation African in United States can play an important bridge in order for people in Africa to understand the issues that we have here in the United States with the LGBTQ community. I think that is a specific strategy that we can use to try to have conversations about LGBTQ rights and LGBTQ harm in the United States and in parts of Africa and other places in the world. And in addition to that, I wanted to share that when I was there, I spoke to Lloyd about possibilities of looking at Book of Resolutions, and there are so many so many resolutions in the Book of Resolution that are related to Africa and places outside of the United States. And I was telling them that maybe they can also bring resolutions to the General Conference, and we can support the efforts based on the priorities that they have. They have the priorities of missionary service, global health. I remember evangelism, self-determination, humanitarian. There were many priorities, and all of those can be brought to the General Conference, and all the different groups and coalitions that are progressive can support that. Of course, if they come with something against LGBTQ, well, that's a different story. But anything that is related to social issues that we can support, that's another way of working together for General Conference and to advocate, to motivate annual conferences and groups to go there and help with whatever is needed there as well. So I wanted to just mention that as something that it was important for me for us to connect that way as well. Thank you.
Okay. The last part was questions regarding what do we see as the future of the United Methodist Church, or what comes past 2024? Was the last set of questions. Yeah. So do we have any responses on what do we see as for the future of what's coming?
Well, I'll be brief. I always like the slogan of the United Church of Christ, which is God is not done with us yet. It's never a period. So I believe that we are in a journey together, and that in this journey together we experience the creative power of the Spirit. And in our conversations, our holy conversations, are spaces for the Spirit to continue. And I like what Lloyd said about, we're going to keep on talking. We're going to keep on talking.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
I think we might be about ready to wrap this up.
I think we are. We're at the 90-minute mark, Jen. So
Yeah. This is wonderful. Thank you all for coming. Lloyd, would you be willing to close this with a word of prayer?
Would I ask Reverend Msusa to do that, our General Secretary, since
That
he is
would be
here? And
great.
yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much.
Actually, he's the one who coined the slogan, "We were, we are, and we will be United Methodist." He's the one who coined that right at the beginning, and everybody was excited.
Shall we pray? Lord Almighty, we thank you. For we know that, God, you are not static. You are dynamic God. You deal with dispensations. You works on time. And we thank you for the United Methodist Church. We thank you for this movement and for the forum and for the Zoom meeting. As we are talking and planning for the betterment of your church. For we know it is your church. It is your kingdom. It is your ministry. And we are workers. Father, we thank you for everyone that has been committed to the church, to the ministry that you have given unto us. And we pray, oh God, that division, bickering shall not be part of our ministry, but love, unity, focus, relationship shall be part of the ministry. As we know that the ministry is embodied in the ministry of Jesus Christ, may you help us that we may lead like Christ did. May you help us that we walk like Christ did. Yes, even the disciples of Jesus, they couldn't agree. At times they could disagree, but they agreed and moved on until the end, and they fulfilled the mission. We thank you, Father. May you bless us now as we are about to dismiss. In the blessed name of our Lord Jesus Christ, we have prayed. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Gabriel.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, sir.
Everybody, and good night and
Thank
be
you.
well.
Thank you.